Okay, guys, I have to spill every single detail about yesterday because it's been playing on a loop in my head, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. I'm Emma, 20 years old, a college sophomore juggling classes, a barista job, and the chaos of moving into a new apartment. I was struggling with a stack of boxes when my neighbor Ethan appeared with that easy grin that's impossible to ignore. He's married, completely off limits, and I was just trying to get my stuff inside without collapsing. But when he insisted on helping, and our small talk turned into something softer, more electric, let's just say the way I thanked him left us both a little stunned. My heart's still racing, and I need to tell you every moment. Stick with me, and please like and subscribe for more stories like this. The late afternoon sun poured over the cracked pavement of the parking lot outside my new apartment building, the October heat clinging stubbornly to the air, making my t-shirt stick to my back. I, Emma, stood beside my beat-up hatchback, staring at a teetering stack of cardboard boxes that held my entire life psychology textbooks. Thrift store clothes, a mismatched set of dishes, and a few succulents I'd miraculously kept alive. At 20, I was used to handling things on my own classes at State University. Rent payments, a barista job that barely covered my bills, but moving was a whole new level of chaos. My arms ached from hauling boxes up 2 flights of stairs, and sweat beaded on my forehead, plastering my dark hair to my neck. I was in a faded gray t-shirt, black leggings, and scuffed sneakers. My ponytail fraying like my patience. I eyed the last stack of boxes, labeled books and kitchen stuff, and groaned. They were heavy, and the thought of another trip up the stairs made me want to sit on the curb and admit defeat. That's when I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me, and a familiar voice called out, "You planning to move those with sheer willpower, or could you use a hand?" I turned, and there was Ethan, my new neighbor from across the hall, leaning against the side of his beat-up sedan with an easy grin that made my stomach flip. He was probably in his early 30s with dark blonde hair that fell just a little messy over his forehead, hazel eyes that seemed to catch every detail, and a build that made his black t-shirt and jeans look unfairly good. I'd met him and his wife Claire a few days ago when I signed the lease. Claire was a lawyer, always rushing off in tailored blazers, her blonde bob sleek, and her eyes focused like she was already arguing a case in her head. Ethan was the opposite, warm, approachable, with a smile that lingered a little too long, making my cheeks flush before I could stop them. Not that I was noticing. He was married, and I was just the new tenant trying not to drop her life's possessions. I laughed, brushing a strand of hair from my face, my cheeks warming under his gaze. Willpower's failing me fast. I'm about 1 box away from waving a white flag. He chuckled, walking over, his hands in his pockets, his grin turning playful. Can't let that happen. Let me help. He reached for the top box, labeled books, and lifted it with ease, his arm muscles flexing under the weight. Where to? I hesitated, not wanting to impose, but his smile was disarming, and my arms were screaming for mercy. Yesha, they're heavy, and I don't want to rope you into my mess. He raised an eyebrow, already heading toward the building. Too late. I'm roped. Lead the way, Emma. My stomach fluttered at the way he said my name, and I grabbed a smaller box, hurrying to catch up. Okay, fine. But only because I'm not above exploiting free labor. He laughed, his voice low and warm, echoing in the stairwell as we climbed. Exploiting, huh? I'll send you my bill later. Fair warning, it's gonna be steep. The hallway was narrow, the carpet worn but clean, and my new apartment was at the end, door propped open with a sneaker from my earlier trips. It was a small space, barely 500 square feet, but I'd already started making it. Mind string lights draped over the windows, casting a warm glow. A sagging thrift store couch pushed against one wall. and a coffee table cluttered with my laptop, a half-empty water bottle, and a bag of chips I'd been snacking on. The boxes were piled in the living area, a chaotic mess that screamed, "New tenant, no plan." I set my box down, and Ethan followed, placing his carefully beside it, his eyes scanning the room. "Nice setup," he said, his voice genuine, lingering on the string lights. "Got a cozy vibe going already." I smiled, wiping my hands on my leggings. "Thanks. It's a work in progress. Trying to make it less cardboard box chic and more livable." He chuckled, his hazel eyes meeting mine, sparkling with amusement. "You're off to a good start. Need help with the rest of those downstairs?" I hesitated, my cheeks warming again. "If you're sure you don't mind, I'll owe you big time." He waved it off, heading back toward the door. "No big deal. Moving's the worst. Let's get it done." We made 3 more trips, hauling boxes up the stairs, our banter growing easier with each one. He teased me about the weight of my book box. "What, were you moving a library?" And I fired back about his car, a sedan with a dented fender that looked like it had stories to tell. By the time we brought up the last box, I was out of breath, but laughing, my earlier stress melting away. Ethan set the final box down, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. And I couldn't help but notice the way his t-shirt clung to his shoulders. A faint sheen of sweat on his skin making him look, well, unfairly good. "Thanks," I said, catching my breath, leaning against the counter in my tiny kitchen nook. "Seriously, you saved me from a total meltdown." He grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Happy to help." I remember when Claire and I moved in, thought we'd never unpack. Took us weeks. My heart twinged at the mention of his wife, a sharp reminder of the line I couldn't cross. Claire was real, a lawyer with a life intertwined with his, always rushing off to her firm in sharp heels and sharper focus. I'd seen her in the hallway, her steps purposeful, her phone always in hand. I kept my smile in place though, gesturing to the fridge. "Want some water?" Or, "I've got soda. Least I can do for my personal moving crew." He chuckled, nodding. "Water's good. Thanks." I grabbed 2 bottles from the fridge, handing him one, our fingers brushing for a split second. The contact sent a tiny jolt through me like static electricity, and I busied myself opening my bottle, hoping he didn't notice the flush creeping up my neck. We stood in the kitchen, sipping our drinks, the air feeling warmer, closer, like the small space was shrinking around us. The counter barely separated us, and I could feel the heat of his presence, his casual ease filling the room. "So," I said, trying to keep things light, "how's life across the hall? You and Claire are settling in, okay?" He shrugged, his smile softening. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes, tiredness, maybe, or something heavier. "It's good. Claire's always swamped with work, so I'm usually the one keeping things together at home. Freelance graphic design keeps me busy, though." I nodded, leaning against the counter, my bottle cool in my hands. "Sounds intense. Do you ever get a break?" He chuckled, running a hand through his hair, making it messier in a way that was unfairly charming. "Not often. I sneak in some music or a walk to the coffee shop down the street. Gotta stay sane, you know?" I smiled, twisting the cap on my bottle. "Music, huh? Let me guess, classic rock." His eyebrows shot up and he grinned, clearly impressed. "You're good." "Yeah, Springsteen's my guy. You a fan?" "My dad's obsessed, so I grew up on Born to Run," I said, setting my bottle down. "What's your favorite?" He took a sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thunder Road. Something about it just hits. That feeling of wanting to escape. Start over." I nodded, leaning forward slightly, my elbows on the counter. "Solid choice. It's got that 'let's get out of here' vibe." He laughed, his gaze softening. "Exactly. You get it." He paused, then added, "What about you? What's your escape from college chaos?" I tilted my head, thinking, old rom-coms, mostly. When Harry Met Sally is my go-to. I've watched it at least a dozen times. He raised an eyebrow, his smile turning playful. "Rom-coms? Didn't peg you for a hopeless romantic." I laughed, rolling my eyes, but my cheeks warmed. "Not hopeless. Just hopeful. There's a difference. He grinned, setting his bottle down, his eyes locked on mine. Noted. You're full of surprises, Emma. The air thickened, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. He was married. I was just the neighbor, but the way he was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time made my heart race. I needed to steer this back to safer ground. So, I said, forcing a lighter tone, any pro-moving tips? Because I'm drowning in boxes here? He chuckled, glancing at the stacks around us. Start with the essentials. Kitchen, bedroom. The rest can wait. Want me to stick around and help unpack a few? I hesitated, knowing I should say no, but his offer was tempting, and the idea of tackling the boxes alone felt overwhelming. If you're sure you don't have better things to do, I said, smiling, I'll owe you like a bakery's worth of cookies. He laughed, rolling up his sleeves, revealing forearms that were distracting. Deal, but I'm holding you to those cookies. We started with a box labeled kitchen stuff, pulling out dishes, mugs, and a cheap set of silverware I'd bought on clearance. Our banter flowed easily, him teasing me about my mismatched plates. What, no fine china? And me firing back about his packing skills, since he'd stacked the boxes in a way that blocked half my living room. We moved to the couch, sitting cross-legged as we sorted through a box of books. Our knees brushing occasionally, each touch sending a spark through me. I caught myself stealing glances at him, his focus intense but his smile warm. And every now and then, he'd catch my eye, his grin making my cheeks flush. You've got a lot of sight books, he said, holding up a dog-eared copy of Thinking Fast and Slow. You really into this stuff? Yeah, I said, stacking a novel beside it. I like figuring out why people do what they do. Like why someone would spend their afternoon helping a stranger with boxes. He laughed, looking at me, his hazel eyes warm. Maybe I'm just a nice guy. Maybe, I said, tilting my head, a grin tugging at my lips. Or maybe you're avoiding your own work. He grinned, leaning back, his arm brushing mine. You're too sharp, Emma. I'm gonna have to watch myself around you. I laughed, the sound easing the tension, but that spark was still there, humming in the air. We kept sorting, talking about our lives, my small-town upbringing, where the biggest excitement was the annual county fair, his college days at a state school, where he'd stayed up all night designing posters for campus events. We laughed about the upstairs neighbor who vacuumed at midnight, and he teased me about my succulents, calling them miracle plants for surviving my care. As we unpacked, I noticed a wobbly shelf in the corner, a cheap unit I'd assembled poorly when I moved in. I said, pointing to it. That thing's been driving me nuts. It's one wobble away from dumping all my books. He raised an eyebrow, standing to inspect it. You got a screwdriver? I can tighten it up. You're kidding, I said, but I was already rummaging through a drawer for a screwdriver. You're gonna fix my shelf now? I'm gonna owe you a whole bakery. He chuckled, taking the screwdriver and kneeling to tighten the screws. I'm keeping a tab. Cookies, cake, maybe a pie. I sat on the couch watching him work, his movements steady and confident, his t-shirt pulling tight across his shoulders. There was something oddly comforting about it, the way he focused, his hands sure and precise. I caught myself staring and busied myself stacking books, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. When he finished, the shelf looked sturdy, and he stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. There, no more book avalanches. You're a lifesaver, I said, standing too, my shoulder brushing his as I moved to put a book back. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, and I caught his eye, seeing that same warmth, that same curiosity. Seriously, thanks. I owe you big. He chuckled, his voice low. I'll settle for those cookies, but no pressure. We moved back to the kitchen, and I offered him another water, needing an excuse to keep him there a little longer. He accepted, and we stood by the counter, sipping our drinks, the conversation shifting to lighter things. Movies we loved, the best food trucks in town, our shared hatred of the building's creaky elevator. I told him about my obsession with rom-coms, how When Harry Met Sally always made me cry, and he admitted he was a sucker for classic rock. Humming a few bars of Thunder Road that made me laugh. But every now and then our eyes would meet, and the air would shift heavy with something unspoken. I kept reminding myself, he's married, Emma, don't get carried away. But it was hard when he was standing so close, his laugh warm and genuine, his presence filling the room. The conversation drifted to our pasts, and I shared stories about my small town life. The kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. He talked about his college days, how he'd fallen into graphic design after a failed attempt at engineering, and how he met Claire at a campus party. There was a warmth in his voice when he mentioned her, but also a hint of strain, like the busy life they led was taking its toll. We laughed about awkward first dates. Mine was a guy who spent the whole night talking about his ex. His with a girl who hated rock music, and the air felt lighter, but that underlying spark was still there, making my pulse quicken. We unpacked a few more boxes, sorting through clothes and knickknacks, his hands occasionally brushing mine as we handed items back and forth. Each touch felt like a small electric shock, and I found myself lingering, my fingers grazing his longer than necessary. He didn't pull away, his eyes meeting mine with that same curious warmth, and the room felt smaller, the air thicker. Eventually, I glanced at my phone. 7 p.m. Time had slipped away, and I knew he should go. You probably need to get back, I said, my voice reluctant, my heart sinking a little. I've kept you long enough. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me, warm and searching. Yeah, probably. But this was nice. He paused, then added, you're good company, Emma. My heart fluttered, and I busied myself rinsing my bottle. You're not so bad yourself, I said, keeping my tone light. But don't let it go to your head. He laughed, shaking his head. Too late for that. I walked him to the door, grabbing his jacket from the couch where he'd tossed it. Here, I said, holding it out for him. He slipped it on, and I reached to adjust the collar, my hand lingering on his shoulder just a second too long. The touch was electric, my fingers tingling against the fabric, and when he turned, we were close. Too close, his eyes locking onto mine, warm and searching. Thanks for the help, I said, my voice soft, my hand still resting lightly on his arm. You're kind of amazing. He smiled, his gaze softening like he was trying to figure out what to say. Anytime, Emma. You know where to find me. My heart raced and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll hold you to that, I said, matching his tone. I stepped back, opening the door, but I couldn't resist one last tease, needing to lighten the moment before it consumed me. Next time I'll have those cookies ready, maybe even a pie. He grinned, leaning against the door frame, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm counting on it. See you around, Emma. As he stepped into the hallway, I closed the door behind him, leaning against it, my heart pounding. The cool wood pressed against my back, but it did nothing to cool the warmth in my chest. I knew it was wrong that sparked between us. He was married and I was just the neighbor. But as I stood there, the memory of his touch, his smile, his voice lingered, a moment neither of us would forget. Thanks for listening to my confession, guys. I hope you felt that spark as much as I did. If you loved this story, please like and subscribe for more.